examples of recursive function. Here's an example. F of 0 of x equals x. F of n of x equals, f of n plus 1 of x equals f of n of x. Effectively, it's a function of two variables and an x, and you just keep multiplying them. It's exactly how you would define natural numbers in Gödel's general recursive functions. There's a more broad definition, but Gödel was, let's just say Gödel.
That's correct. Anybody?
I'm on camera now saying Gödel. You know, you're able to define lots of geometric progressions and this kind of stuff, and you're even able to define numbers, and you're even able to define the predecessor function. And it was an alternative to Alfonso Church, and it kind of just sat there. So we had Church's effective computability, anything that's this lambda in this untyped lambda calculus. You have Gödel's, and then Alan Turing comes around and says, well, forget math. Let's build gears. Yeah, forget math. So Turing comes around. He says, Turing, we're not spelling anything. Forget math. He didn't say this, obviously. So if you've never watched this video, please do that. Forget math. Let's build a machine with an infinite tape and some rules.
Forget math. I'm just going to go to the physical world where things are easy.
Yeah.
I haven't been there recently, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
So he built this Turing machine, which has an infinite tape, some symbols.
And by built you mean thought of.
Yes, thought of or wrote about. And then it has some rules, like it's reading the tape. You can only have some kind of finite symbols. It can rewrite symbols. Blah 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 blah. And actually used this Turing machine to show that there was equivalence between lambda calculus, general recursive functions by Gödel, and this Turing machines. So when they discovered all this, they were like, okay, well, this must be a definition of effective computability. If all these things just happen to be the same, we can represent them with each other. But that was also very puzzling, because that means that the decision problem is false, that there are proofs or programs that cannot be proven true or false given a set of axioms, for which trying to determine if they can be proven or not will fail because of non-termination. So
in these systems.
So if you accept this as a definition of effective computability,
which is the Church-Turing hypothesis.
Yeah, which is the Church-Turing hypothesis, then the decision problem is false, because you can't, because you will be able to construct programs or proofs with a set of axioms for which running this algorithm will not stop. So this was a bit of a difficult standstill. So the question became, how do we fix this? If they're all equivalent, then perhaps we can repair one of these things to see if we can regain a definition of effective computability, but still be able to answer the decision problem. So I like Philip Walder's remark here. He says, like any good problem, the way to solve it is to add types. Very similar to Bertrand Russell's own work, Alfonso Church adds. Not blue doesn't work. Church says add types. So this spawns the devil spawn of the simply typed lambda calculus.
What's wrong with the simply typed lambda calculus?
I don't know, I just felt like I said spawn, and then I thought about devils.
Corresponds to intuitionistic logic. Just acceptable.
If all you want to compute is basically nothing, it's great. As long as just don't want to get any work done. It's really cool.
As a potential solution to this, and it has almost the same definition. It has first, it has a type context. So there's, we call it usually for the B, where you have some universe of types. So these are your types. So often it's gamma, tau, sigma, tau, zigli, whatever. I just can't remember my letters. You have variables. And these variables, V has type tau. So V has type tau. You have applications. And so if you have an E1 of type sigma to tau, and you have an E2 type sigma, then you have E1, E2 type tau. And you have similarly abstractions. This formulation is not in the paper. It's taken from this textbook. It's more idiomatic, but I'll save the other formulation for comparing natural deduction to the other thing. And abstraction, if you have x sigma and e tau, then you have lambda x e of type sigma to tau. It's I don't know how much work it is to prove it, but I don't know how to prove it all the time. But it turns out that when you do beta, and they also have a beta reduction appropriate to making sure the types match and stuff like that. And it turns out that if you analyze, so analyzing beta reduction, it turns out that everything has a normalized form. So this introduces some jargon, but effectively what it's saying is that everything in the simply typed lambda calculus can be reduced to a unique form finitely. And they call this it's strongly normalized. And what's interesting is that here, if you take this as the definition of effective computability, then you get a correct answer to the decision problem. You get that if anything expressible in the simply typed lambda calculus is effectively computable, then because everything can terminate has a normal form in it, the process of checking if something is provable or not is simply reducing it to normal form. If it has that, and since everything can be reduced to normal form, then it's decidable. So everything is decidable. It's trivially true in here. Anything expressible in simply typed lambda calculus can be proven. But the question becomes, how does this relate to logic? Because Hilbert was looking for proofs in logic and if they terminate or not. But all that we've really talked about is lambda calculuses and various different ones. How do those things relate? And this was really the insight of I don't know if I'm going out of order in my notes here. Haskell Curry. So in looking at this, we have the decision problem, which is saying we have these proofs in first order logic. Maybe there's some axioms, and we want to be able to say, given these axioms, I need an arbitrary proof. Give me an algorithm that can look at that and say if it's provable or not. And Alfonso Church had the lambda calculus, Alan Turing had the Turing machine, and Gödel had his general recursive functions, and they're all proven to be recursive. And so if you take those as effectively computable algorithms, then you can show that you can build an algorithm that can do this, but not all proofs can terminate. And then in the simply typed lambda calculus, everything terminates, so we get an answer. But how does this all relate to logic? Because we haven't really talked about its relationship to logic. So how does this even relate to Hilbert's original problem? And this was Curry's insight. So there was a student of David Hilbert. So apt that the student would try to solve his master's problems.
Whose name we can spell because he has 2 programming languages named after him.
Haskell Curry, student of Hilbert.
Is he German?
I don't know. His insight in thinking about all of this, being a student of Hilbert and also being into the logic and everything, was able to take all of this. And his insight was that, if within the simply typed lambda calculus, so looking at the simply typed lambda calculus, LC, functions of type A to B, we get the wording right here, can be viewed as propositions, as the proposition A implies B if A and B are propositions. So he was looking at this, and I don't know how he came up with this insight, because this is like the biggest leap in the paper, but in the simply typed lambda calculus, you have these application and abstractions which introduce the types, sigma to tau functions. So if you have a function from A to B, and instead, let's just do a little bit of hand waving. Instead, every time we have a type here, we say, actually, we have a proposition. Then A to B really looks like A implies B. That is, given an A, I can produce a proof of B. In the same way, given a value of A, a value of type A, I can produce a value of type B. And this insight was the propositions as types, or propositions are isomorphic types. And this was then further extended by Howard, but we'll go to it in a second. But so Haskell had this insight, and I was saying, how did he come up with this insight? Well, there was also at the same time a guy named Gensen. The work of this guy Gensen, who defined at age 25 in like 1938, I think.
I think we only give people's ages when we, for some reason, think that it's present. Like,
I don't know.
How old was Kurt? We don't know.
He's probably like an old man.
Yeah, so that's like, whatever.
But like, human beings are just worthless after the age of 30. So, at age 25, okay, I guess I don't know. So at age, doesn't matter. And this is interesting, because I didn't know that he formalized natural deduction. I thought this had been done like a billion years ago, but by who? By algae. Floating amoebas and propositions in the membrane. So he formalized natural deduction in the systematic way that we do it now. And I don't know if he invented the notation with the lines or not, but he said, here's what natural deduction. Here's how to do proofs in natural deduction. He showed that A, B, you can introduce rules, lambda introduction, and you can eliminate rules. Gamma elimination 1. So he defined what natural deduction meant, and in doing so, brought more formalization to how we talk about proofs. In his logic, here he has a rule. So here's a rule. And it has, if you have an A and you have a B, then you can introduce and connect them. I think Steve kind of went over this time. And you have elimination rules. If you have an A and a B, then you can eliminate it to produce an A. If you have an A and a B, you can eliminate it to produce a B. If you have a B and you want to make an assumption A, so that's what this notation is. I'm assuming an A, so I'm bringing an A into scope, and I'm proving that. I'm bringing it in, then I can introduce this connective here and produce A implies B. And this is modus ponens. Given A implies B and an A, I can reduce that into a B. And what's interesting about Gensen is that what he identified here is that every one of these introduction rules also comes with an elimination rule, that they always come in these pairs. And that this started to speak to these computability motivation that I felt I was having while I was reading the paper. So I don't know if Haskell Curry was reading Gensen or not when he made this identification. And the reason I say that is because you can show that all of these rules actually are equivalent rules in the simply typed lambda calculus. And we'll do this in a second. We'll do this right now. Showing you introduction and elimination rules in place of where we had the abstraction and my note here is just show. Where in place of where we had the lambda abstraction and introduction. So it's pretty quick. It takes 2 seconds. You don't get you end up with this little pie in front, but it's really just to symbolize that you've made an operation on this value L. And similarly, if you have an X of type A and an N type B, then you can abstract it, and the X rules. Well, does everyone see how they're basically equivalent? In here, you're introducing a variable in scope, using it to derive an N, and that's kind of like a function. And here, you're given a function and a value of the right type, and you can reduce it through application to produce a type B. This is really just that application rule. And here you're just introducing these notions of products here, which are the same as hands. And so I don't know if that was, they don't really explicit in the paper explicitly, but if this was the inspiration for, this may have been the inspiration for Curry's insight. Curry's insight being that, wait a minute, if I view these functions as sort of like implication, if they're propositions of the same type. And this equivalence is true for this form of natural deduction, but it also begs the question, if there is an equivalence of these two, do we have equivalences for other forms of logic? So let's say I have some more rules here, or as Stephen showed, many different kinds of logics. Is there also a computability or a lambda calculi that accompanies all of them? And it turns out that there is. And there are lots of examples in this that people in this room have used, because most people here programmed in Java. At least one time, and it shows that the second order lambda calculus was actually the inspiration for Java generics and generics in C# through this composition. And in fact, that discovery of the second order lambda calculus, which I haven't written down yet. In fact, I was too lazy to find it, but was discovered both by a logician and separately by a computing scientist, bring further historical motivation for this. And in the paper, they go through a whole bunch of examples. Like there are these things called session types, and there are modal logics that produce new computability things. So Howard, another logician. So Howard they implied that he was writing some sort of like obituary for a church, and or sort okay, he took this propositions as types, and he looked deeper at proof elimination rules and said, okay, well, if I have, so there's some rules here to simplify proofs. So here's an example, simplification of a proof. Just try to do it real quickly. Most of them are like, the super obvious thing. So suppose I have ampersand introduction to A and B, and then I have ampersand elimination to A. This is just the same as A. So in here, what he was showing that is if you have these pairs of introductions and eliminations, that they can be simplified. Obviously, if you have A and B, and then you make A and B, and then you reduce it back to A, then it's just the same as saying you had A. And it turns out that there is an equivalence in the lambda calculus, and that's the following: if you're given an M of type A and an N of type B, and you produce a product of type A cross B, and then you reduce it to pi 1 M N of type A. Well, this is just the same as M of type A. Like, if you take tuples, everyone has worked with tuples, hopefully? Or I shouldn't say everyone has. If you've worked with tuples in the programming language, you take your values of 1 and foo, okay, take those values, put them in a tuple, and then give you 1 back. I mean, it's the same. It's sort of like a reduce. However, this really is evaluating a program here. You're given two values. You wrap them up into a tuple, and then you reduce that tuple back. And so these simplification schemes, or you can think about them as rewrite rules, become evaluation strategies. And that was Howard's addition to this when looking at the work of Haskell Curry. So that's kind of it. That the paper kind of ends it there. But to summarize, and he didn't really start with the decision problem, but I really feel like it's at the heart of this. You have David Hilbert's decision problem of, can I, the definition, can we, the decision problem being, if we take as input a statement of first order logic and some axioms, can we decide if it is provable from these axioms using the rules of logic? Can you give me such an algorithm that can do this, or some effectively computable thing that can do this? That was his problem. And in the meantime, while people are either accidentally or in reaction to discovering new definitions of effective computability, we find that in some areas this is false, and in other definitions of effective computability, it's trivially true, the decision problem. And when formalizing the rules of logic, as Gensen did, and taking those formalizations and looking at them in the context of a lambda calculus, Haskell Curry was able to find the similarity between Gensen's natural deduction and the simply type lambda calculus by looking at propositions as types. And Howard, overviewing the whole phenomenon, was able to further deepen that analogy by looking at simplification rules as evaluation strategies. And as evidenced by history, this analogy of propositions as types has really actually even a step further, and it says you have logics as lambda calculi. And that's where that thing ends. So that was my reading of it, and I hope it was a coherent narrative. I guess, did anyone have any questions? All right.
Yeah, so you're saying that if you have the lambda calculus allows you to write non-terminating programs, but if it's the type lambda calculus by construction, everything terminates.
Yes, great.
But I guess I don't see how it really helps you with the decision problem, because if I'm, because if the decision problem is like, here's a theorem, or maybe it's a theorem, we don't know, there's a formula, I want to find out if it's true or not. I'm not given a program.
Yeah.
I need to say, is there a program that has this type? And I don't see that, there's no algorithm for that here.
So sorry, that wasn't clear. It's sort of at a higher level. Suppose you could even produce such a program within the untyped lambda calculus.
Right.
Then you could feed it
yeah.
a thing that could not normalize.
And then we don't even have the story about what counts as that.
It's sort of like at the middle of it. And then similarly, if there does exist one within the simply typed lambda calculus, it will produce a result every single time because everything terminates. But yeah, you still have to produce that, and I don't know. This is why they didn't really. They showed that they showed the undecidability within classical logic or the untyped lambda calculus, but they didn't show decidability within simply typed lambda calculus. They didn't prove that. They just sort of allude to saying it would be trivially true because everything terminates. But I think maybe there is a proof because I think trivially you can say every proof. I think you can look at it like this: in a logic represented by the simply typed lambda calculus, every proof has a normal, can be reduced to an answer. So therefore, it's sort of trivially true. You don't have the algorithm, but I guess you have the algorithm. It's putting it into a normal form.
But that's an operation on the proof, right? Not an operation on the types.
Yeah, but I think the whole point being that if it can be reduced, then it is provable within that.
Oh, sure, yeah. So an algorithm for checking proofs.
Yes.
Yeah, this is important to go.
But that is the decision problem: is this thing provable or not, given the logic it's in?
Isn't that? Sorry, the problem I'm talking about is this a proof of that statement? Which is an easier thing.
I think you have to if you prove in simply typed lambda calculus, if you prove the normalization rules, which you can't, there's a proof at this point. Then
You're saying I should have read the paper?
it's not. I don't think it's in the paper.
Well, it's not in the paper.
Yeah.
I read the paper.
Yes. Great reading of the paper.
Yes.
If you prove the normalization rules, then it's subtle, but the decision problem becomes trivial. I can find the quote in here where he doesn't really
proof in the system. And you can
That's the type of stuff.
Yeah.
So he
And
says,
then you can reduce it all the way to the bottom. Then you have decided.
Yeah.
Right, that is a decision. Reducing to the bottom is a decision. And if you're in a system that always terminates, then you will always be able to get to a decision, and therefore, trivially, you can decide. I think that's the general sketch.
Because the programs are proof. Yeah, I imagine I don't have the program. I'm going to say here's a theorem.
yeah.
Here's my proposition. Is that a theorem? That's one of the things that Hilbert was wanting to be able to do, right? Here's a proposition. Can I?
Okay, so there's a few things. So for one, you have to be able to write this using the rules of your lambda calculus. So
I am a logician. I just write down a proposition. So I'm interpreting the decision problem as being the question: given a type, determine whether it's inhabited. And I think we're talking about the decision problem as given a program is well typed.
well, yeah. So they use this isomorphism to translate it into simply typed calculus, apply your normalization rules, and then translate it back. Like that's their answer to this is they state that there's this isomorphism, so then you can because these whatever rules you use for elimination, you just take the logical rules for elimination. And if you can prove that the logical rules for elimination always terminate, then if this is a proposition, you can always put this into a normal form.
No, put the proof of this into a normal form. Exactly.
I see what you're saying.
That's why I don't have to prove it.
Yeah, maybe there's a more subtle
Because
definition.
what you're trying to prove is whether or not things are provable.
Yeah.
So you just have to start with a proposition, and you want to work backwards to construct a proof of it.
So,
Right? You want to start with a proposition. You want an algorithm that gives you only axioms at the outside using rules.
Right.
Right? That's what you want to do.
That's what I would.
Yeah. And these elimination rules are the opposite of that.
okay, here's your...
Okay, the only way I could get this is by having an A, B, and A, and an A on the other side, and then I did implication introduction.
It's because elimination and introduction always come in pairs.
Right.
If you know that elimination can happen, then introduction can also happen in a determinate.
It is exactly because of the... I lost my thought. It's exactly because of the... It's a constructive logic. So here's Walder's reading of it. One goal of Hilbert's program was to solve the Einsteinian problem. That is, to develop an effectively calculable procedure to determine the truth or falsity of any statement. But in a constructive logic, he goes further that for any statement, either it or its negation possesses a proof, but it's constructive, so you don't have an introduction rule like the law of excluded middle to introduce things. So if you have a proposition, it's going to be like provable, I guess, or so he says the program presupposes completeness, that for any statement, either it or its negation possesses a proof. And I think so intuitionist logic, I think it's...
If it's provable, then there's a construction for it, and that will be constructed.
Yeah, or like if you have a construction, then it must be well constructed, I guess.
Sure, yeah. Everything is great once I have a program which has this type. Right? Or even I can program something claims that's this type, but I can check it out mechanically, so that's great. But if I just say, here's the type, is it inhabited?
So
It's a little formed formula, right? It's not necessarily the type of any program.
Yeah.
So the thing is that in the lambda calculus, especially in the simply type lambda calculus, every type is inhabited by trivially, basically. Like there's an obvious, there's I don't know, there's like a free inhabitant. No, which is just like because the way the rules are defined, you can always like mechanically construct an inhabitant from any type in simply type lambda calculus anyway. Did you? Simply type lambda calculus is completely useless, and this is like it can only encode like really simple things.
Yeah, I don't understand that simply type lambda calculus goes to intuitionistic logic, which therefore means this type is not going to happen. This is Peirce's law, it's equivalent to double negation in terms of... This is the type of...
remember that in Hilbert's statement it says within a set of axioms.
Right.
And so if the axioms don't allow you to express this type, then you could never ask this question.
I just did.
Well, but you can't, this is not valid in this logic. The question is not an arbitrary proposition, is it valid or not? The question is a proposition
That's exactly the question.
No, a proposition within like a set of axioms.
Is it? I claim it is. This is within the axioms. Prove me wrong.
Maybe you...
Or do you program that has this type which I'm not to see? Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe this is not the right type for LCC. Well, this is going on for a while. Why don't we...
Yeah. I guess we'll have to have a more subtle understanding of the decision problem. Because I think that there's a nuance in its definition that maybe all of us aren't understanding.
Yeah, I'm stuck on something stupid, which often happens.
Well, so is your problem just that you? I'm not sure what the problem is.
Yeah, let's put it to discussion
Yeah.
after.
So one thing I want to point out that's an interesting remark he made in here, and I think Steve kind of touched upon it. So when Steve was giving his classical logic introduction, you know, Steve had his implication errors, and then he introduced modus ponens as like a separate thing, as in the meta theory. And you have this sort of contradiction where you want to introduce modus ponens in natural deduction. So you want to say, you know, A implies B, and given an A, then you have a B. So you're saying, if I have A and B, and I have an A, then produce a B. But that is a tautology because this notation in itself is assuming some meta level of modus ponens. But the interesting thing is that if you then translate it into the lambda calculus, you don't have the problem anymore because you have a clear modus ponens at the meta level, this bar being the modus ponens. But you're not defining implication anymore, you're defining function application. So you get a clearer or a less conflicted tautology. You don't have the tautology there.
Why is this? What is the problem over here?
Well, if I wrote this out, if A, B,
Right.
and B, then
You mean and A?
yes, right, and B, and A, then B.
Right.
But this, like this statement, is a logical statement in a meta theory. This is
I accept this. This is absolutely true.
okay.
I have no problem with this. I accept this. I still don't understand how you get B out of all this stuff. And you say, okay, well, if you accept this, and you accept that I've proven A implies B and A, then you have to accept B. I say, oh, no, okay, I accept that. But how do you get B?
You're
Right. Well, because
you're using your mind's own understanding of modus ponens to define a rule of modus ponens. Like for me to even communicate this bar thing, this bar, blah 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 blah. This bar is blah 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 blah.
assuming that your implication is defined in the same way as the bar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point is, it's a different implication. That's why Steve labeled it as modus ponens, because it's an implication at the meta theory level.
Well, it doesn't have to be at the meta theory anymore once you've read it as a bar, because you've included it inside your system.
Yeah, you've encoded it in your system. But when you're explaining it to someone, there's this like, it's an uncomfortable tautology because you're like, you're using a
That's why I'm always uncomfortable with the way that we explain things to people, because we like, for me it's just like, so if I have something written like this and something written like this, then I'm allowed to write this. It's like entirely symbolic.
But when you're introducing, how dare you be gone? Get out of here! When you're explaining the proof, like say you have a proof and you're in your court of law. Somehow we have a court of law where there's proofs, and the lawyer who is the logician says, here is my proof. Well, when he's explaining the interpretation of the proof, he's going to have to use modus ponens. He doesn't have the bars anymore. I can't just say, well, according to the placement of the bars, then this dude's out of jail.
Right. Well, yes. This is the problem with applying symbolic logic to.
But the nice thing is that in this model you just have function application, which as mathematicians and scientists we have a much firmer grasp on. So it's not that you haven't fixed it, but you've very clearly made the modus ponens at the meta theory level, and the implication here you've encoded as something entirely different that doesn't have this confusion of logic. And this I thought was a really nice anecdote.
You write this problem with hand, like often in treatments of these single-sided code. A and B is true if and only if A is true and B is true.
Yeah.
And just to understand that statement, you need to already know what and is, and
That's why I love truth tables.
yeah.
See,
This is the rule.
you're hitting specifically on why I love truth tables, right? Because you don't say anything about and. You just write this, and it's like that.
This is the
That's what this symbol means. You don't even have to call it and. You can say there's a symbol. It is called this, and it works like this, and that's the whole rule. You don't have any meta theory in it.
I'll stipulate that. Yeah.
Okay. So does anyone else have any questions or comments? Did anybody have any insights or anything like that when they're reading the paper? Any anecdotes? Did you find the paper easy to read? Was it hard to read?
Parts of it.
parsable, like all the historical and getting into the details of what we discussed took a bit more effort.
Yeah.
The rest of it was very interesting the way it presented the history.
He also mentions that there's other correspondences that people are looking for this. So there's this very buzzword in the Haskell community of homotopy type theory, which is looking at propositions as types and a topological interpretation under notions of these things called homotopies. So there's even more equivalences that people are interested in. And for each of these equivalents, the nice thing is that you have, that means that in that field, in that field, you might have equivalent logic. So, for example, if somebody wakes up one day and they write the lambda calcula, this is the 11 lambda, the left lambda, and I can then ask the question, what kind of logic does that thing correspond to? But it's hard to just come up with your own lambda calculus. But we have a wealth of established knowledge in topology, and this means that we can take homotopy type theory and then look into topology for other analogies of propositions. And the same thing with category theory. Category theory, we have a wealth of knowledge in category theory, and that's yet another equivalence. And we can look for equivalences of logics and calculus. And this is like a very fervent field of research. So anyways, thanks everyone.